My daughter thought the reflection in the microwave door was nothing but a smear. She thought 69 years of living had left my eyes dim and my mind soft. She was wrong. I saw the small blue vial shaking in her hand. I saw the clear liquid fall drop by drop into my butternut squash soup. And when she turned away to reach for a spoon, I did the only thing a father who had just cleared his child's $50,000 debt could do. I switched the bowls. The Detroit winter wind was howling against the kitchen window, rattling the frame. But the chill inside my house was far worse. I sat at the head of the walnut dining table, a spot I had occupied for 40 years. My hands rested flat on the tablecloth. To anyone looking in, I was just Vincent Holt, a retired chemistry professor, perhaps a little slowed by age, perhaps a little lonely since my wife passed. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories, where real people share the moments that changed everything. If this is your first time here, I'm glad you found us. Go ahead and subscribe so the next story comes straight to you without you having to hunt for it. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple in one word. What is your mood right now as you settle in for this? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. A note before we dive in, some elements of this story have been shaped for audio storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real persons or events is coincidental. It is the truth at the heart of it that matters. But my mind was as keen as the scalpel I once used in the lab. I was watching Diane, my only daughter, my pride and joy, or so I had told myself for 32 years. She stood at the kitchen island, her back to me. The stainless steel microwave was mounted above the stove, its dark glass working like a flawless mirror. She had no idea. She was too focused on keeping her hand from shaking. I watched her pull a small glass vial from the pocket of her cardigan. It wasn't any prescription bottle. No label. The liquid inside was a pale, guileless blue. She uncorked it with a quick, jerky motion. I saw her pause for just a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. I held my breath, praying to a God I hadn't addressed in years, that she would stop, that she would remember the pony rides, that she would remember the college tuition I'd paid in full, that she would remember how just last week I had written a check to American Express for $50,000 to wipe out the debt she and her husband Craig had run up on designer clothes and vacations they had no business taking. She didn't stop. She tipped the vial. 3 drops, 4, 5 into the steaming bowl of butternut squash soup, my favorite. She stirred it quickly, the metal spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. That sound, that soft clink, was the sound of my heart breaking. It was the sound of the final break between father and daughter. She turned to the sink to rinse the spoon. This was it. I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't make a sound. Years of working with volatile chemicals had taught me that panic causes explosions. Precision prevents them. I leaned forward. Every movement was silent. My left hand took my bowl, my right hand took hers. I slid them across the polished wood. No friction, no sound. Swap. 3 seconds. When she turned back around, drying her hands on a dish towel, I was sitting exactly as before, hands folded, eyes drifting vacantly toward the snow building up in the backyard. My heart was hammering against my ribs like something caged, but my face was stone. Craig walked in, then my son-in-law trailing that cheap aftershave he insisted was European. He rubbed his palms together, bringing a gust of cold air with him from the garage. "Smells great, Di," he said, his voice too loud, too bright. He came over and dropped a hand on my shoulder. It landed heavy like a shackle. "How are we feeling tonight, Vincent?" he said. "Ready for some warm soup?" I looked up at him. I caught the sheen of sweat sitting on his upper lip. It was 70 degrees in the house. Why was he sweating? I knew exactly why. Because he was a failed real estate agent with a gambling habit I wasn't supposed to know about. because he was most likely the one who had sourced that blue vial. "I'm hungry, Craig," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "Good." I played my part. The old man. The mark. Diane carried the bowls over. She set one in front of me, the clean one. She set the other in front of her empty seat, the poisoned one. "Eat, Dad," she said, her voice pulled tight. "Eat while it's hot." She sat down across from me. Craig took the chair at the end, the triangle of betrayal. I lifted my spoon. I felt both of them stiffen. Craig stopped halfway through, pulling out his chair. Diane's eyes were fixed on my hand. They were waiting for the old man to take his medicine. I dipped the spoon into the thick orange liquid and raised it to my lips. I blew on it gently. I could feel their stares burning into me. I took a sip. "Delicious," I said. I watched Craig exhale. His shoulders dropped a full 2 inches. Diane forced a smile that came out closer to a grimace. "I'm glad you like it, Dad," she said. She reached for her own spoon. I watched her. I watched the woman I had taught to ride a bike. The woman I had taught the periodic table to when other fathers were watching cartoons. I remembered a Tuesday afternoon when she was 10. She had looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, what happens if you mix bleach and ammonia?" I had sat her down and walked her through the chemical reaction, the chloramine gas, the way it scorches the lungs. I taught her that chemistry respects nobody. It is cause and effect, action and reaction. Introduce a foreign agent into a system and the system responds. She was now introducing that agent into her own system. She took a large spoonful. She swallowed. "Eat up, Diane," I said softly. "You'll need your strength." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the scraping of spoons against ceramic. I ate slowly, tasting every bite of soup that was meant to be my last meal. It was seasoned with thyme and cream. It tasted of survival. Craig was eating fast, shoveling food as though he wanted it over with. He kept cutting glances at me, then at his watch. "So, Vincent," Craig said, his mouth still half full. "Diana and I were talking. We've been thinking about the upkeep on this house. It's a lot to manage on your own, isn't it, with the snow and the roof repairs?" Here it was. The pitch. "It's fine, Craig," I said, blotting my mouth with a napkin. "I manage." "But do you?" Diane set her spoon down. "Dad, you left the garage door open last night, and last week you forgot to pay the water bill. We're just worried about you." I had not forgotten the water bill. I had dropped the check in the mail on Monday. As for the garage door, Craig had the access code. He had probably opened it himself to make me doubt my own mind. "I'm fine," I said again. "Maybe so," Craig said, leaning in. "But we found this facility, assisted living top tier, just outside the city. We think it might be time to take a look." "Just a look." I turned to Diane. She was lifting another spoonful to her mouth. "Is that what you want, Di?" I asked. "You want to put me in a home?" She swallowed. "It's for your own good, Dad. We just want you to be safe." Safe. The word sat in the air between us, weighted with irony. Then Diane's expression shifted. She dropped her spoon. It struck the bowl with a sharp clatter. Her hand went to her throat. "What's wrong?" Craig asked, his eyes moving to her. "I don't know," she whispered. Her voice had gone wet. "It tastes bitter." "Probably the sage," I said evenly. I took another sip from my bowl. "Tastes fine to me," she coughed, dry hacking. She pressed her hand to her chest. "It's warm in here," she said. "Is the heat up too high?" She pushed her chair back. Her face had gone pale. The color was leaving her faster than I had ever watched color leave anyone. Digitalis. It had to be. I knew the signs. I was a chemist after all. Nightshade extract. It brings on nausea, vomiting, then cardiac arrhythmias. In sufficient doses, it stops the heart outright. It mimics a heart attack, a perfect weapon for ending an old man with high blood pressure. But Diane had a strong heart. Her metabolism ran faster. It would work on her differently. My vision, she stammered. She blinked again and again. It's blurry. There are halos around the lights. Craig was on his feet. Do you okay? I feel sick, she said. She gagged and doubled over, arms wrapped around her stomach. Oh, God. I stayed still. I watched the chemistry unfold. Craig rushed to her side. What is it? Is it the flu? She vomited on the floor, violent, sudden. I stood then, but I moved slowly, as the old man they took me for would move. Oh, dear, I said. Dad, help me, Craig shouted. She's burning up. He pressed a hand to her forehead. She was convulsing now, her body seizing in the chair. She slid off and struck the floor hard. It's not the flu, I said. My voice was still cold. Craig looked up at me, his eyes blown wide with panic. What? That looks like a reaction, I said. Tiny Hadrum. What did you put in the soup, Craig? He froze. The mask slipped. I could see the terror of a man who had just walked into his own trap. We didn't know nothing. What are you talking about? Noddy, she's been poisoned, Craig, I said. Call 911, unless you want her to die right here on the kitchen floor. He lunged for his phone, his fingers stumbling across the screen. Diane was gasping for air. Her eyes were rolling back. Her hands clawed at the linoleum. She looked up at me. In that moment of agony, something clear and knowing came into her eyes. She looked at me, then at the empty bowl in front of her, then at the bowl sitting in front of me. She understood. Dad, she wheezed. Don't try to speak, honey, I said, lowering myself to kneel beside her. I didn't touch her. I just leaned close. Save your strength. You're going to need it to explain all of this to the police. Craig was screaming into the phone. Yes, my wife, she's having a seizure. I don't know. She just ate dinner while his back was turned. I saw it. Diane had knocked a tissue from her pocket when she went down. Folded inside it was the empty vial. She hadn't disposed of it. She had kept it on her person. I reached out and closed my hand around the tissue. I slid it into my cardigan pocket. Exhibit A. The sirens were audible within minutes. We lived close to the fire station. Craig was kneeling over her now, crying. Real tears, maybe. Or tears for himself, because he understood that his plan had gone spectacularly wrong. She is going to be okay, right, Vincent? She has to be okay. I stood up and looked down at the two of them. The greedy daughter, the desperate husband. I don't know, Craig, I said. Depends on the dose. His head snapped up. The dose. I didn't answer. I walked to the window and watched the red lights of the ambulance sweep across the snow. They were coming to save her for now, but the real poison wasn't in the soup. It was in this house. And I had just begun the process of flushing it out. The paramedics came through the door. Chaos swallowed the kitchen. They got her onto the stretcher. Sir, are you coming? The paramedic asked Craig. Yes, of course. He looked over at me. Dad, are you coming? I glanced at the mess on the floor, the vomit, the spilled soup. "I'll follow in my car," I said. "I need to get my coat." They rushed her out. The door slammed. The kitchen went quiet. I walked to the sink. I picked up my bowl. I poured what was left down the drain and hit the disposal. The evidence of my survival vanished with a grind. I reached into my pocket and drew out the tissue with the vial. I held it up to the light. One small drop of blue liquid clung to the bottom. I went to the hall closet, pulled on my heavy wool coat and my hat. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like a victim. I didn't look like a frail old man. I looked like a man who had just declared war. I walked out into the cold Detroit night, the snow compressing under my boots. I wasn't simply going to the hospital to check on my daughter. I was going to finish what they had started. As I drove toward the hospital, the city lights smearing past my phone rang. It was my attorney, Warren Alcott. I had sent him a single code word while the paramedics were working. Nightshade. "Vincent." Warren's voice was deep, gravelly. "You initiated the protocol. Is it done?" "They made their move tonight, Warren," I said, keeping my eyes on the icy road. "Digitalis in the soup." "Jesus, Craig," Warren breathed. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Diane ate it." A long silence stretched across the line. Warren Alcott was the only person who knew the full measure of what I was worth. He knew about the $15 million from the pharmaceutical patent I had sold 5 years ago. He knew I had been living as a modest retiree to see what my family was made of. He knew the results had been failing. "She ate it," Warren asked. "I switched the bowls." "Vincent, that is complicated." "It's self-defense," I said. "Now listen to me. I'm heading to Ascension St. John Hospital. Craig is going to try to spin this. He will say I'm senile. He will say I mixed up the ingredients. He will push for a conservatorship tonight." "I'll be there," Warren said. "I'll bring the papers." "We freeze everything." "Everything," I said. "The joint accounts, the credit cards, the mortgage payments. I want them to feel the cold, Warren. I want them to know what it is to have absolutely nothing." I hung up. I pulled into the hospital lot. Through the glass of the emergency entrance, I could see Craig pacing under the bright lights. He was on his phone, calling his bookie, perhaps, or a lawyer. I cut the ignition. I sat in the dark for a moment. I thought about the little girl who used to grip my hand tight when we crossed the street. That girl was gone. She had been replaced by someone who would poison her own father for an inheritance. I stepped out of this car. I moved toward the sliding glass doors. She thought I couldn't see her, but I see everything. And tonight, everyone else would see it too. The antiseptic bite of the emergency room air hit my nostrils, a hard contrast to the winter cold I had just left behind. I sat on the edge of a hard plastic chair coat, pulled tight, watching the double doors where they had taken Diane. Craig was working the floor in front of the nurse's station, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. He was performing hands through his hair, demanding updates, playing the anguished husband to perfection. But I tracked the way his eyes moved around the room, checking the exits, checking the faces of the officers who had just walked in. He wasn't frightened for his wife. He was calculating his odds. A doctor came through the swinging doors. He looked wrung out, scrubs wrinkled. Dr. Osei, his badge red. He swept the waiting area with his eyes and found us. Craig was on him before he could draw a full breath. "Is she alive?" Craig said, grabbing the doctor's arm. "Tell me she is alive." "She is stable, Mr. Grady," the doctor said quietly, lifting Craig's hand away. But it was very close. "We have identified the toxin. It is digitalis, a massive overdose." The word hung in the air like a blade. Digitalis. Nightshade. A common garden plant, beautiful and lethal. A plant that I, Vincent Holt, the retired chemistry professor with a fondness for botany, had growing in my greenhouse. Craig went still. For just a moment I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He had counted on the doctor naming food poisoning or an allergic reaction. He hadn't expected them to pin down the specific compound so quickly. But Craig was a survivor, the kind who thrives in the dark, and he pivoted faster than I had given him credit for. He wheeled around and leveled a shaking finger straight at my face. "It's him!" Craig shouted, his voice fracturing with practiced hysteria. "It's the old man." The two officers near the entrance moved forward, hands settling on their belts. The room went still. Everyone, the nurses, the patients, nursing broken arms and fevers, turned to look at the white-haired man folding into his coat. "What are you talking about, sir?" one of the officers asked, stepping between Craig and me. "He grows it," Craig said, spittle at the corners of his mouth. "He's got a garden full of strange plants. Nightshade. He grows nightshade. He brews these teas, these herbal remedies, because he doesn't trust doctors." He turned his wild eyes on me. "You did this, Vincent. You got the jars mixed up again, didn't you? You put your poison in the soup thinking it was parsley or some other weed." The officer turned to me. His expression wasn't yet accusatory, but it was careful. "Sir, do you grow nightshade?" This was the moment. The fork in the road. I could stand up, straighten my spine, and tell them plainly that I was a sound man who had just outmaneuvered a murder attempt. I could lay out the debt, the bowl switch, the blue vial sitting in my pocket. But doing it now would leave me exposed. It would come down to my word against theirs. Craig would lawyer up. He would bury the money trail. He would paint me as a paranoid old man. No. I needed them to feel certain they had won. I needed to be the prey long enough for the trap to close around their ankles. I let my shoulders cave. I let my hands shake visibly, the buttons on my coat trembling. I let my eyes go wide and watery, clouded with the look of the very old and very lost. I don't know," I stammered, my voice thin and frail. "I have a garden, yes. I dry herbs for tea, for seasoning." "Oh, you see," Craig shouted, triumphant. "He admits it. He is losing it, officer. He has been forgetting things for months. Leaving the stove on, forgetting names, wandering off. I told him not to cook anymore. I told him it wasn't safe." I looked down at my hands and kept playing the part of the shamed, bewildered father. I thought it was basil," I whispered, just loud enough for the officer to catch. "The jars, they look so much alike. My eyes aren't what they were. Oh God, did I hurt Di?" The officer's posture softened at once. He didn't see a murderer. He saw a tragedy. He saw a confused old man who had made a devastating mistake. He looked at Craig with something close to sympathy. "It sounds like an accident, sir," the officer said. "A terrible accident." "An accident," Craig spluttered. But I could see the relief washing over him. He had a way out. He didn't have to answer for attempted murder. He could lay it all at the feet of my failing mind. It was perfect for him. Better than perfect. It laid the groundwork for the conservatorship. "He almost killed my wife," Craig shouted, forcing tears. "Now he's dangerous. He can't be left on his own. We've been trying to get him help, trying to get him into a facility, but he refuses." I buried my face in my hands and let out a sob. It wasn't difficult. I was weeping for the daughter who had sat at that table and watched me eat, waiting for me to fall. "I'm so sorry," I wept. "I've been so confused lately. I just wanted to make a nice dinner." The doctor looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Holt, digitalis toxicity is very specific. We need to understand exactly how much was ingested to treat her effectively." "Do you still have the plant matter?" I threw it out, I stuttered. In the disposal. I cleaned up. I wanted the kitchen to be tidy. Craig shook his head and turned to the officers with a look of pained helplessness. You see, he destroyed the evidence because he doesn't even understand what he did. He can't go back to that house alone. He is a danger to himself and everyone around him. The officer nodded slowly. Sir, we may need to ask you a few more questions, but for now, I need to sit down. I gasped, one hand going to my chest. I feel dizzy. Nurse, the officer called out. They brought a wheelchair and settled me into it. As they wheeled me away from the waiting area, I glanced back at Craig. He was dabbing his face with a handkerchief, speaking rapidly to the second officer. He looked destroyed. But as the automatic doors slid shut between us, I caught a brief, involuntary smirk. He believed he had pulled it off. He thought he had converted a botched murder into a golden ticket control of my life and my millions. What he didn't know was that in my pocket, wrapped in a tissue, sat a glass vial carrying his wife's fingerprints. What he didn't know was that while he was performing his grief for the room, I was cataloging every word he said for use against him in court. He thought I was a senile old man losing his grip on the world. He had no idea he was looking into the eyes of a chemist who was simply waiting for the reaction to reach its boiling point. I let them wheel me into an examination room. I let them check my vitals, and I sat still waiting for the noise to settle so I could make my next move. The game had shifted, and Craig had played his hand straight into mine. The nurse left me alone, pulling the door shut with a soft click that sounded like a starting pistol. She had told me to wait for the doctor and offered me a warm blanket and the gentle smile people reserve for the confused and the very old. The moment the latch caught, the tremor in my hands disappeared. My spine straightened, shedding the weight of 20 years. I wasn't the frail figure hunched in a wheelchair anymore. I was the man who had sat across from pharmaceutical executives and walked away with a fortune. I moved to the door and pressed my ear to the cold wood. Beyond it, I could hear the emergency room's chaotic rhythm, the squeak of rubber soles monitors beeping, families speaking in low, urgent voices. Craig would be out there somewhere, pacing, probably rehearsing his lines about my dementia, or perhaps calling his creditors to assure them the payout was close. He had no idea that the clock counting down was his own. I cracked the door. Clear. I slipped into the hallway, moving quickly and quietly, and ducked into the single-occupancy restroom near the nurse's station. I locked the door. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, throwing a hard, clinical glare across the white tiles. I ran the faucet and let the water run, a habit from years of conducting business in rooms where walls had ears. I reached into my inner coat pocket for my phone. Not the jitterbug phone Craig insisted I use. This was a slim, encrypted device that held the keys to a fortune my family didn't know existed. I dialed a number I had kept in memory for a decade. One ring. Warren Alcott picked up. No greeting, just status. They took the bait, Warren. I said, my voice low and level, watching my own reflection in the mirror. The face looking back was worn, eyes red at the rims, but the man behind those eyes was cold and precise. Craig is shaping the story. He's accusing me of senility. He's claiming I confused the nightshade with cooking herbs. He's laying the groundwork for an emergency guardianship hearing. Good. Warren said, the rustle of papers in the background. That was the projection. If they file for guardianship, they open themselves up to discovery. We can subpoena their financial records and establish motive. Exactly, I said. But we need to press harder. They're desperate, Warren. Craig has bookies at his door. He needs cash fast. That's why they rushed the poisoning. If they believe they've won, if they think I'm about to be put away, they'll move to drain the accounts immediately. Let them try, Warren said with a short, dry laugh. They think they're robbing a piggy bank. They have no idea they're trying to break into Fort Knox. Which brings me to why I'm calling, I said, leaning toward the mirror. It's time to drop the curtain. For 40 years I allowed them to believe I was nothing more than a high school chemistry teacher with a modest pension and a paid-off house. I let them think whatever I had was the result of careful budgeting and frugality. I never told them about the patent. I never told them about the nights I spent in the garage lab developing the hydrophobic polymer coating that is now standard on every surgical instrument in the country. I never told them I sold the rights 15 years ago for $12 million. I kept it from them because I needed to know if they loved me or if they loved what I was worth. Tonight I have my answer. Execute Protocol Shield. There was a pause. A heavy silence carrying the full weight of total financial warfare. Protocol Shield was the nuclear option. We had constructed it years ago, a contingency plan for a worst case I had prayed would never arrive. Are you certain, Vincent? Warren asked, his professional composure slipping just slightly. Once this is done, there is no reversal. It freezes everything. The joint checking account you share with Diane, the cards you authorized for Craig, the mortgage on their house you've been quietly covering the monthly payments. Everything goes dark. I'm certain, I said, my voice like iron. They tried to kill me, Warren. They sat at that table and watched me eat and smiled doing it. I want every card they swipe to be declined. I want every ATM to return their cards. I want their phones lighting up with foreclosure notices. I want them to feel the walls tightening. I want them to feel as completely helpless as they planned for me to be. Understood, Warren said. Initiating the lockdown now. By the time you walk out of that bathroom, they will have nothing. The only money they'll have is whatever's in their pockets. And Warren, I added, watching a drop of water fall from the faucet, flag the accounts for fraud. If they attempt to access anything, I want the bank notifying the police. Make it appear to be a routine automated security alert. I want them paranoid. I want them turning on each other. Consider it done, Warren said. Stay in character, Vincent. The next 24 hours are going to be volatile. I ended the call and returned the phone to my pocket. I studied the mirror one final time. I roughed my hair, leaving it unkempt. I rounded my shoulders, bending my spine back into the shape of a beaten old man. I rehearsed the vacant stare, the trembling lip. I turned off the faucet. Silence came back. I unlocked the door and shuffled out into the hallway, small, slow, and lost. Inside, the chemist was assembling the final components for an explosion. Outside, I was just a bewildered father looking for his room. I made my way back toward the examination area, ready for the next act, knowing that somewhere in a server room, my real power was just coming online, and my family was about to discover that the man they had tried to bury was the only thing keeping them above water. I settled into the hard vinyl chair in the hospital waiting room, chin heavy on my chest, breathing slow and shallow. To the nurses passing by and the orderly dragging a mop across the floor, I was just another worn-out old man undone by the trauma of a terrible night, a father who had nearly lost his daughter to a dreadful accident. But under the brim of my hat, my eyes were cracked open just enough, and my ears were tuned to a frequency of desperation that only a man like Craig could broadcast. Craig was pacing near the vending machines a few yards off, vibrating with anxiety, his movements jerky and without purpose. He kept pulling out his phone, its screen throwing pale, cold light across his sweating face in the dim corridor. He looked like a cornered animal, and I knew precisely why. The poison had failed. The police hadn't cuffed me, and the silence from his creditors was about to end in a way that frightened him far more than any badge. His phone buzzed. Not a ringtone, a hard, angry pulse against his thigh. Craig flinched as though he'd touched a live wire. He wrestled the phone from his pocket, nearly dropping it on the linoleum. He looked at the screen, and I watched the color leave his face entirely until he resembled something propped upright rather than standing. He didn't answer right away. His eyes swept the room, empty chairs, sleeping families, and finally settled on me. I let out a soft, wheezy snore and shifted my weight as if burrowing deeper into sleep. Satisfied that his audience was unconscious, Craig put the phone to his ear. No greeting, just a frantic, hushed hiss that carried easily through the sterile quiet of the hallway. "I know what time it is, S. I know." He turned away from me, shoulders hunched, shrinking himself, as if he could disappear into the wall. "Please, you have to hear me out. There was a complication. A medical complication. Not me, the asset." I nearly smiled. The asset. That was what 4 decades of being a father-in-law had amounted to in their ledger. Not a person, not family. An asset to be liquidated. Craig listened, and then he began to shake. His grip on the phone went white-knuckled. "No, S. Please don't touch her. She's in the hospital right now. We're here." He listened again. 500, yes. 500,000. I know the number. I swear to you, S, it's coming. It's tied up. It was supposed to go through probate. A long pause. Craig lifted his free hand and ran his thumb slowly over his ring finger back and forth. 7 days, S. That's not enough time to... He stopped. He was receiving a description of what would happen if he failed something I could only piece together from his reaction. He yanked his hand away from his face as if scalded. Okay, 7 days. Or the finger, I understand. I'll get it. I swear on my mother's life I'll get it. Just don't come here." He hung up. He stood there staring at the vending machine chest, heaving. $500,000, $500,000. That was what his life had been leveraged against the debt he had accrued, gambling on futures he didn't understand, and horses that ran too slowly. I had known he was reckless with money. I'd cleared a $50,000 hole for him just the week before. But I hadn't grasped how deep the grave went. Craig wiped his face with his sleeve, sucked in a long, shuddering breath, and turned toward the recovery wing. He needed to regroup with his partner. He needed a new plan because murder had failed, and the sharks were already circling. I let him push through the double doors before I started counting. At 10, I rose. My joints popped an honest concession to age, but my movement was steady and quiet. I followed. I kept to the edges of the corridor, my footsteps making no sound. He slipped into room 304. The door didn't latch. It rested open just a fraction of an inch. I pressed my back flat against the wall beside the doorframe, closed my eyes, and fed everything into the voices coming from inside. Diane was awake. Her voice was raw and stripped of the soft performance she usually put on for me. "You look like hell, Craig," she said. "S called," Craig whispered. The panic in his voice was naked and uncontrolled. "He gave us a week. 7 days die, or he starts sending pieces of me in the mail." Diane let out a low groan. "I hate him. I hate that old man." "Why isn't he dead, Craig? I put enough digitalis in that soup to drop a horse. I watched him eat it." "He must have a stomach like a goat," Craig muttered. "Or the dosage was off. It doesn't matter now. Plan A is finished. The police are already asking about the garden. If we make another move on him, they'll be watching. So what do we do?" Diane's voice climbed, edged with panic. "We can't sit around and wait for him to die naturally. We don't have years. We have a week." Craig paced the small room. I could hear his shoes on the floor. We pivot, he said. We go to Plan B. We force the issue. Plan B, Diane said. You mean the home? Not just a home, Craig said, his voice dropping lower, taking on a harder shape. A conservatorship. Total legal control. We don't need him dead to get to the money due. We just need him declared incompetent. But the doctor, Dr. Osei, said he seemed lucid. Diane pushed back. Dr. Osei doesn't know him, Craig said. Look at what happened tonight. He poisoned his own daughter because he confused parsley with nightshade. That is what the police report is going to say. That's the narrative. He's dangerous. He's senile. He's a threat to himself and to everyone around him. I held my breath. They were rewriting what had actually happened. They were taking my act of survival and forging it into a weapon to use against me. We file for emergency guardianship tomorrow morning. Craig went on, the strategy assembling itself in his frantic mind. Should we get a court order, we freeze his assets. Once we hold power of attorney, we liquidate the house. We reach the retirement accounts. We pay S. But what if he fights it? Diane asked. He can be stubborn. Let him fight, Craig said. Who is the judge going to believe a devoted daughter lying in a hospital bed recovering from poison, or a confused old man who keeps deadly plants in his kitchen? We act concerned. We act heartbroken. We tell the court we're doing this to keep him safe. We put him in that facility upstate, Diane said. The secure one, the one with the high walls. Exactly, Craig said. We lock him somewhere he can't hurt anyone. We take control of the estate. It's clean, it's legal, and it resolves the problem in 48 hours. I pulled back from the door. I had heard everything I needed. My blood had gone cold, not from fear, but from a rage that was sharp and crystalline and perfectly controlled. They weren't simply trying to kill me. They were going to erase me, strip me of my rights, my name, my freedom. Turn the law itself into a weapon and use it to take what I had built. I walked back to the waiting room, my mind running at full speed. They believed they were playing chess. They were still on checkers. They thought my entire worth was a paid-off house and a pension check. They knew nothing of the offshore's accounts, nothing of the patent royalties, and they had no idea that I had already set a protocol in motion that would reduce their financial world to dust before dawn. I lowered myself back into the vinyl chair and resumed the shape of a sleeping, harmless old man. Let them file their papers. Let them ring their lawyers. They were about to discover what it costs to try to corner a chemist. Because while they were drawing up plans to cage me, I was already preparing to blow the roof off everything they had built their scheme upon. I closed my eyes and let morning come. Craig's 7-day clock was running. Mine had a much shorter fuse. The silence in the car on the drive back from the hospital was heavy enough to press a man flat. But I sat in the rear, humming a soft, tuneless melody, watching the frozen Detroit streets slide past the window. Diane was slumped in the passenger seat, her complexion the color of wet ash still hollowed out from the poison her body had fought through the night. Every so often she would throw a hateful look at me through the rear-view mirror, her eyes burning with equal parts revulsion and venom. Craig had the steering wheel in a white-knuckled death grip, his jaw working without sound. He was pushing too fast through traffic, weaving with the desperation of someone who could hear his own countdown running out. We swung into the driveway, the tires grinding over the snow I hadn't bothered to shovel. The house sat dark and unwelcoming, a stage dressed for a tragedy that was still only halfway through its second act. Craig helped Di out of the car, bearing most of her weight. As she shuffled toward the front door, I trailed behind them, moving with the exaggerated fragility of the truly ill, pulling my coat collar tight against the wind. Inside, the air was close and stale, carrying the faint ghost of the butternut squash soup I had poured down the drain. Craig settled Di on the living room sofa, layering blankets over her until she resembled a cocoon of misery. "I need water," she rasped, her voice like sandpaper dragged across stone, "and something to eat. My stomach is empty." "I'll run to the store," Craig said, glancing at his watch. He was jumpy, his eyes skipping around the room. "Electrolytes, crackers, maybe soup." He turned to look at me. "Don't touch her," he warned. "Don't you dare go anywhere near the kitchen." I raised both hands in slow surrender, letting my lower lip tremble. "I'm just going to sit in my chair, Craig. I'm tired. So tired." Craig snatched his wallet and keys. "Back in 20 minutes, he told Di. "Then we figure this out." The door slammed behind him. The sound rang through the house. I crossed to my leather armchair in the corner, the one positioned to face both the window and the sofa. I sat down and watched my daughter. She was staring at the ceiling, her breathing coming in shallow pulls. "Why didn't you die?" she whispered, still not looking at me. "It would have been so much easier." I said nothing. I simply watched her with soft, watery eyes while inside my mind was running the numbers, calculating the distance to the grocery store, estimating the exact moment Craig would be standing at the checkout counter. I could picture it clearly. He would load the belt with expensive recovery drinks, organic broths, maybe a bottle of wine to take the edge off himself. He'd watch the total climb. He would slide his card, the platinum one tied to my primary account, the one he'd been authorized to use for genuine emergencies, but had been running through for golf clubs. And then the beep. The decline. I glanced at the mantel clock on the fireplace shelf. 10 minutes. He'd be there by now. He'd be trying the second card. The one I'd opened in Di's name declined. He would be sweating. He'd try the debit card for the joint household account. Declined, frozen, flagged for suspicious activity. He would be standing there under the fluorescent lights with a line of irritated shoppers at his back. Finally understanding that the plastic in his wallet was nothing but worthless scrap. He would have to walk away empty-handed. He would have to leave the bags behind. He would have to make that walk back to his car with nothing at all, the humiliation scorching his face, the realization spreading that the well had gone dry. It took him 40 minutes to come back. I heard the car screech into the driveway, the engine cutting out hard. The front door flew open with enough force to bang against the wall, knocking a picture frame sideways. Craig stormed in, no grocery bags. His face was a mask of pure, uncut rage. He looked like a man who had peered into the abyss and found it scraped clean. "You!" he shouted, thrusting a trembling finger toward me. Dee sat up, startled. "Bog's sake, where's the food?" "There is no food," Craig barked, kicking the door shut behind him. "The cards didn't work. None of them." "How what?" Di asked, confusion washing over her face. "What do you mean they didn't work?" "Declined all of them. Insufficient funds. Issuer restricted." I tried the credit, the debit, even the emergency card. I stood there like a beggar. He marched straight to my chair and loomed over me. I pressed myself back into the leather, making myself as small as I could. "What did you do?" Craig hissed, flecks of spit flying. "What did you do to the accounts?" I blinked repeatedly, looking up at him with wide, guileless eyes. "The accounts," I stammered. Oh, yes, Warren." Craig went still. "Warren, your lawyer." I nodded slowly. "I called him from the hospital. After the accident with the soup. I was so frightened. Craig, the police were asking me questions. I felt so confused, so So what did you tell him? Craig demanded. I told him I was losing it. I whispered, my voice catching. I told him I couldn't trust myself anymore. I told him I almost hurt Di because I couldn't tell the jars apart. I told him I needed protection. Protection. Dee, said her voice climbing. Yes, I said. Warren said he said if I'm becoming senile, I'm vulnerable. He said people prey on the elderly. He said I needed to lock everything down. Protocol shield, he called it. Craig looked as though he'd taken a fist to the stomach. Protocol shield? What in the hell is that? I shrugged helplessly. I don't know the legal terms, Craig. He said he was freezing everything to protect me. He said until a judge reviews my case, nobody can spend a single penny. Not even me. He said, if I want to buy a pack of gum, I need a court order. The silence that settled after that was total. It was the silence of a bomb that had already gone off, leaving only ringing ears and drifting dust. You froze the money. Craig whispered, his voice hollow with horror. All of it. To keep us safe, I said, offering a weak smile. So I don't get scammed. Warren said it was the responsible thing to do. You idiot! Craig screamed, seizing his own hair with both fists. You senile old fool. Do you have any idea what you've done? I did what was best, I said, my voice wavering. Warren said, to hell with Warren, Craig roared. He spun and drove his foot into the coffee table, sending magazines skidding across the floor. We need that money. We need it now. Why? I asked, all innocence. We have food in the pantry. We have a roof. Why do we need money right now, Craig? He couldn't answer that. He couldn't tell me about the fingers, about the 7-day deadline ticking down. He just stood there, chest-heaving, eyes wild. Di struggled to her feet. Dad, call him back. Call Warren. Tell him to undo it. Tell him it was a mistake. I can't, I said, my tone sorrowful. He said it's a legal process now. Once the protocol is active, it takes weeks to reverse. He said it's for my own good. Weeks. Craig choked out. He looked at Di. The panic was arriving, cold and hard and inevitable. They were beginning to understand that the trap they had been so carefully building around me had just snapped shut on their own legs. They had wanted a conservatorship. They had wanted to prove I was incompetent. Well, I had just given them exactly that. I had played so incompetent that the law had moved in to protect me from everyone, including them. Cash, Craig muttered. We need cash. There has to be cash in the house somewhere. His eyes swept the room and landed on the antique roll-top desk in the corner where I kept my correspondence. Where do you keep it? He demanded, rounding on me. The emergency fund, the stash. Every old man has a stash. I don't. I use the bank. I stuttered. Liar, Craig shouted. He lunged at the desk and wrenched the drawers open. He upended the contents onto the floor, papers, pens, old stamps. He tore through them in a frenzy. Nothing. Check the bedroom. Di yelled, adrenaline temporarily overriding the poison still moving through her system. Under the mattress. In the closet. They worked themselves into a panic. It was wretched and frightening to watch. Craig pounded up the stairs, his footsteps crashing overhead. I heard drawers being yanked free and hurled against walls. The crash of a lamp. He was dismantling my bedroom, hunting for the bundles of cash he'd convinced himself I had squirreled away. Dee limped into the kitchen. I heard the clatter of ceramic jars toppling over. She was checking the cookie jars, the freezer, the gap behind the loose brick in the pantry. I stayed in my chair. I didn't move an inch. I listened to the demolition of my home and felt a strange, settled calm move through me. Let them look. Let them wreck the furniture. They would not find a single dime. I had moved the cash years ago. The only things waiting for them were dust and their own mounting desperation. Craig came back down the stairs a few minutes later, face scarlet, hands empty. He was clutching a small wooden box he'd turned up in my closet, my wife's jewelry box. "This is it!" he screamed, rattling the box. "Costume jewelry. Where are the diamonds? Where's the gold? Mom was buried with her ring somewhere." I said softly, "You know that." He hurled the box across the room. It cracked against the fireplace, scattering cheap bead necklaces across the hearth. "We are screwed," he breathed. He turned to Di. "S isn't going to wait for a court order." "What do we do?" Di asked, her voice shaking. Craig looked at me. His eyes had gone dark, carrying a malice that had moved well past greed into something raw, something primal. "We accelerate," he said. "We don't wait for the hearing. We get him committed now tonight." "But the lawyer," Di started. "Forget the lawyer." Craig cut her off. "We find a doctor who will sign the paper for cash. We get him locked into a psych ward. Once he's in, we become his legal guardians by default. We can override the lawyer. We can force the bank to release the accounts." He crossed to my chair and bent down until his face was inches from mine. I could smell the sour reek of fear on his breath. "You are sick, Vincent," he said, his voice dropping to something low and threatening. "Very, very sick. You are seeing things. You are hurting people, and we are going to get you the help you need, even if we have to drag you there." I held his gaze, blinking tears into my eyes, playing the frightened old man. But inside I was smiling. They were desperate. They were reckless. And they were about to make the kind of mistake that sends people to prison for the rest of their lives. "Okay, Craig," I whispered. "Whatever you say." "Good," he said, straightening up. He pulled out his phone. "I know someone, Dr. Finch. He lost his license, but he still has a prescription pad. He can be here in an hour." He went into the kitchen to make the call. Dee sank back onto the sofa and watched me with flat, lifeless eyes. I settled into my chair and waited. Let them bring their discredited doctor. Let them try to haul me away. I had one more card left to play, and it was sitting in the chemical compound I had brushed onto the surface of the safe upstairs just before leaving for the hospital. The game was moving into the endgame, and they had no idea they were already in checkmate. The heat in the house was a physical thing, a weight pressing against my chest, thickening the air until every breath took effort. Sweat ran down my back and soaked into my shirt. But when I looked across the living room, Craig was bundled in a heavy wool sweater, rubbing his arms as though he were standing in an open field in January. Di was burrowed under a thick Afghan teeth, chattering with a theatrical intensity that might have been funny if their intentions weren't so lethal. They had cranked the thermostat up to 85 degrees, turning the house into a steam room, but the temperature they were truly trying to set, the psychological one, was absolute zero. I dragged a trembling hand across my forehead, keeping up my side of the performance. "It's very warm in here, isn't it?" I asked, my voice thin and muddled. I plucked at my collar. "Perhaps we could open a window." Craig stared at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Warm, Vincent. It's freezing. The furnace can barely keep up with the draft. Look at the thermostat." He jabbed a finger at the digital readout on the wall. It read 62 degrees. I knew he had interfered with the sensor or simply taped a fake display over the screen. But to the senile old man I was performing, it was reality bending in front of my eyes. I let my jaw slacken, blinking, as if trying to bring the numbers into focus. "But I'm sweating, Craig," I murmured. That's hypothermia, Dad," Di said from the sofa, her voice syrupy with manufactured concern. "When your body gets too cold, it gets confused. It's called paradoxical undressing. You feel hot, but you're actually freezing. Please put your coat on." She held out my heavy winter coat. I stared at it. The room was already spinning with heat. Pulling that coat on would be its own kind of punishment. But if I refused, I was combative. If I complied, I was obedient but deranged. They were rewriting my sensory reality engineering doubt about the very nerve endings in my skin. I took the coat. I put it on. The heat turned unbearable within seconds. Dizziness rolled through me, my pulse thudding hard in my ears. "There," Craig said with a thin, tight smile. "Better. You look pale, Vincent. You're shaking." I was shaking from heat exhaustion. But to them, every tremor was fresh evidence of my deterioration. I sat pinned in my chair, swaddled in wool, while they watched me with the cold, unhurried patience of vultures waiting for the animal below to stop moving. The afternoon collapsed into a series of carefully staged provocations. I set my reading glasses on the side table to rub my eyes. I closed them for 10 seconds. When I reached for the glasses, they were gone. I patted the table. I checked the floor. Nothing. "What are you looking for?" Craig asked, eyes still on his phone. "My glasses," I said. "I just set them. I just put them right there." "Right where?" "You haven't had your glasses all day," Craig said offhand. "You left them in the bathroom this morning. Remember you said the frames were hurting your nose?" I stared at the bare table. I knew I had taken them off not 10 seconds ago. I could still feel the ghost weight of the frames on the bridge of my nose, but the table was empty. I could have sworn," I stammered. Craig let out a long, loud sigh of frustration. He got up and walked into the kitchen. A moment later, "Vincent, come have a look at this." I hauled myself to my feet, the heavy coat dragging at my shoulders, and shuffled in. Craig was standing at the open refrigerator, pointing to the middle shelf beside the milk carton. My glasses were sitting there, filmed over with cold. "Why did you put your glasses in the fridge, Vincent?" he asked, his tone gentle, patronizing. "Were you trying to cool them down?" I stared at them. It was clumsy work. Obvious if you knew what to look for, but effective. I don't remember doing that," I whispered. "That's the problem, Dad," Di said, materializing in the doorway. "You don't remember anything anymore. You're dangerous. What if you put the car keys in the microwave? What if you put the cat in the oven?" "We don't have a cat," I said before I could stop myself. "Not anymore," Craig said, his voice going dark. "Not since you let it out last winter. We had never owned a cat. Not once." But in that moment, with the heat bearing down on me and my glasses sitting frost-covered in the refrigerator, the edges of my reality felt soft and bendable. This was gaslighting at its most stripped down and vicious. They weren't merely lying. They were pulling my history apart, stone by stone. They wanted me to shatter. They wanted me to rage, to lash out, to give them the justification, to call Dr. Finch and say he's having an episode, come and collect him. I dropped my chin toward my chest. I picked up the cold glasses. I'm tired," I said. "I think I'll go up to my room." "Good idea," Craig said. "Get some rest. You need it." I climbed the stairs, my legs like wet sand. I went into my bedroom and pulled the door shut. It had no... They had stripped it out weeks earlier, claiming it was a safety hazard in case I had a fall. I dropped the coat and let it lie where it fell, gulping for cooler air. I pushed the window open a sliver, letting the winter cold bite at my face and hands, anchoring me, reminding me that I was alive. I was sane, and I was furious. Night arrived with a fresh torment. I lay in bed, feigning sleep, my breathing slow and steady. I heard the floorboards shift in the hallway. The door handle turned gradual and deliberate. They slipped in like shadows. I kept my eyes shut, my body loose, but every sense wide open. I caught Craig's stale sweat and the cloying sweetness of Di's lotion. They stood over the bed and looked down at me. "He's out," Craig breathed. "Look at him," Di hissed, "lying there so peaceful while our whole lives fall to pieces." They leaned in closer. I felt the warmth of their breath against my face. "You're crazy, old man." Craig whispered, his voice a low, rhythmic drone right against my ear. "You're losing your mind. You don't know where you are. You belong in a hospital, a nice padded room. You are sick." Di picked it up on the other side, whispering into my other ear. "You're a burden. Everyone is laughing at you. You tried to kill your own daughter. You are a monster." They were attempting to reprogram my subconscious. A crude method, but relentless. They kept it up for 10 minutes, a steady drip of poisonous suggestion, designed to bleed into my dreams and hollow out my certainty from the inside. Then they finally pulled back. "Check the safe again," Craig murmured. Maybe he wrote the combination down somewhere new." I heard them moving through my dresser drawers, quiet as mice. They checked the pockets of my trousers. They lifted the edge of the rug. They were hunting desperately for the code to the wall safe hidden behind the painting of the lighthouse in the fog. What I'm about to tell you is the moment I realized just how far the people I loved were truly willing to go. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you was working against you in secret, would you confront them directly? Or would you go quiet and start gathering your proof? They had already accepted there was no cash left in the bank accounts, so they'd talked themselves into believing I must be sitting on a physical hoard somewhere. They left empty-handed, pulling the door shut without a sound. I waited. I counted to 1,000 inside my head, moving through the periodic table to anchor myself: hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, facts, truth, bedrock, things they couldn't touch or distort. When the house fell silent, I sat up. I left the lamp off. I moved by moonlight coming soft through the sheer curtains. I went to my closet and reached to the back into the inner pocket of an old raincoat I hadn't touched in years. I drew out a small, opaque jar and a UV flashlight. I was never just a chemistry professor. I was an inventor. And what was in that jar was a compound I had synthesized years ago for the sheer pleasure of it. An invisible powder that bonded to the oils in human skin and blazed a brilliant, undeniable crimson under ultraviolet light. Adhesive, transferable, and completely impervious to plain water. I crossed to the painting of the lighthouse in the fog. I swung it open and exposed the steel face of the safe behind it. A solid model, no one was getting through it without a drill or the combination. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves from my first aid kit. I opened the jar. Then carefully and methodically, I brushed the fine powder across the keypad. I dusted the handle. I covered the entire front face of the safe. To the naked eye, it was still nothing but cold steel, but to anyone who pressed their hands against it, it would function as a branding iron. I closed the painting back into place. I peeled off the gloves and tucked them away. I hid the jar. Then I went back to bed, though sleep was nowhere near me. I lay flat, eyes on the ceiling, waiting. They were desperate. The loan sharks had handed them a deadline. They wouldn't hold out for the court order. They wouldn't wait for the doctor. They would go for the safe tonight, convinced I had been broken down by the heat, and the confusion convinced I was already catatonic. What they didn't know was that in touching it, they would not just be trying to steal from me. They would be signing their own confession in invisible ink. When Craig put his hands on that keypad, he wouldn't merely be reaching for my money. He would be painting a target across his own palms. And when the police walked through my door in the morning, I wouldn't need to say a single word. I would simply turn on a light and let his guilt blaze like blood in the dark. Let them whisper. Let them hide my glasses. Chemistry doesn't lie. By morning, the reaction would be complete. The mantel clock on the fireplace shelf chimed 2:00 a.m., the sound moving through the floorboards like a funeral bell. I was already wide awake. I had been since the moon came up, sitting in the wingback chair in the far corner of my bedroom, wrapped in a dark blanket that dissolved into the shadows. My phone was in my hand screen, dimmed to nothing, camera app open and ready. I was no frightened old man cowering in the dark. I was a hunter in a blind, waiting for the predators to circle back to the bait. I knew they would come. Desperation has its own scent, acrid and metallic, and the entire house reeked of it. Craig had been pacing downstairs for hours, each footfall telegraphing his panic up through the bones of the house. The 7-day deadline from his loan shark was burning through his mind, and reason had long since left him. I heard the staircase creak, not the careful toe-first creep of earlier. This was heavy and graceless. He had stopped caring whether he woke me. In his reckoning, I was either catatonic from an evening of gaslighting or too frail to matter. I shifted silently into the closet. I had left the door cracked. Hours before, angled to give me a clean line of sight to the painting of the lighthouse in the fog on the far wall. Behind that painting, the wall safe. Behind that safe door, nothing but empty space and settled dust. Craig didn't know that. To him, it was the end of the rainbow. Craig came into the room without so much as a glance at the bed where he assumed I lay sleeping. He went straight for the painting. He was still in the same clothes he'd worn all day, sweat stains spreading dark under each arm. He grabbed the frame and wrenched it open with a sharp jerk that knocked it against the wall. I pressed record on my phone. He fixed his eyes on the keypad. Moonlight caught his profile. He was muttering to himself, running a stream of numbers, birthdays, anniversaries, my social security number. He reached out and punched in a combination. Beep! Red light. He tried again, faster fingers stabbing at the buttons. Beep! Red light. He drove his fist into the steel door. It rang out with a dull clang that made me flinch, but I held the camera steady. "Open, you son of a bitch!" Craig hissed. Di appeared in the doorway. She looked spectral in a pale nightgown, her hair pressed flat against her face, still hollow-cheeked from the poisoning. She didn't glance at the empty bed. She simply stood there watching her husband come apart at the seams. "He changed it," she said. Flat. Empty. "He couldn't have—" Craig snapped, not turning. "He's senile. He puts his glasses in the fridge. He doesn't know what day it is. How would he remember to change a combination? Maybe he isn't quite as far gone as we need him to be," Di said. She stepped into the room and moved alongside Craig. I zoomed in. I needed this, both of them in the frame together. Craig turned to her, eyes wide and frantic. Don't say that. He poisoned Di. His brain is gone. He probably changed it by accident, probably mashed the buttons, thinking it was the microwave." He punched in another code. Beep. Red light. Craig let out a strangled cry of rage. He turned and walked to the fireplace. He lifted the heavy iron poker from the stand. "Craig, no," Di said, but she didn't move. She just watched. I'm opening this thing, Craig growled. I don't care if I have to peel it clean off the wall. He swung the poker. It connected with the keypad with a deafening crash. Sparks jumped. The plastic casing shattered, but the locking mechanism underneath was hardened internal steel. He swung again and again. Panting, grunting with each blow, a man trying to bludgeon his problems into submission. Stop it, Di hissed. You're going to bring the neighbors over. I don't care about the neighbors, Craig snarled, dropping the poker. It hit the floor with a clatter. I care about the 500 grand I owe S. I care about my fingers, Di. There has to be cash in there. There has to be. He pressed his forehead to the cold steel of the safe, defeated. Then he laid both palms flat against the door and slid them slowly downward, leaving twin trails of sweat and skin oil. Perfect. He was coating himself in the invisible powder I had applied hours earlier. He was marking himself with evidence that no amount of scrubbing would remove. Di stepped in closer and rested a hand on his back. The gesture had the shape of comfort, but none of the warmth. We should have used more, she whispered. I held my breath. The camera was rolling. The audio was clean. Used more what? Craig asked, lifting his head. The digitalis, Dee said. Her voice was level, matter of fact. We should have doubled the dose. The old man should have been dead after that soup, Craig. We shouldn't be standing here fighting with safes and lawyers. We should be planning a funeral. There it was. The confession. Clear as a struck bell. Craig looked at her. Not with horror, with regret. I know, he said. I got the extraction wrong. I didn't concentrate it enough. He shouldn't still be here. Di surveyed the room with something close to contempt. He's just taking up space, draining resources that belong to us. He had his life. Why won't he just let go? Why does he have to make everything this hard? 'Cause he's selfish, Craig said bitterly. He has always been selfish, sitting on top of all that money while we go under. He struck the safe one last time with his open hand. We stick to the plan, he said. Tomorrow. Dr. Finch comes at 9. We get the signature. We get the order. We drag him out of here in whatever state we have to. And once he's in the ward, we get power of attorney. Then we bring in a locksmith, a real professional. And if Finch won't sign, Di asked, then we suffocate him with a pillow and say his heart gave out, Craig whispered. I am done playing games, Di. I am not losing my hands for this old man. I stopped recording. My hand was shaking. Not from age, from the sheer adrenaline of looking pure evil directly in the face. I had known they were greedy. I had known they were desperate. But hearing my daughter, the girl I had once carried on my shoulders, wish me dead because I was consuming resources that belonged to her that severed the last remaining thread. The father in me died in that closet. Only the chemist was left. They slipped out of the room a few minutes later, leaving the shattered keypad casing scattered across the floor. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hall. I heard their bedroom door click shut. I waited 10 minutes. Then 20. I stepped out of the closet. I left the overhead light off. I drew the UV flashlight from my pocket, crossed to the safe, and clicked it on. The beam struck the steel, and the darkness came alive with color. It was a masterpiece of forensic evidence. The face of the safe was smeared with glowing crimson handprints, blazing with neon intensity in the pitch-black room. I could make out the whorls of Craig's fingerprints, perfectly preserved against the steel. I could see the exact spot where he had slapped the door in fury. On the floor, the powder that had shaken loose from the keypad when the poker struck it lay scattered in glowing flecks. But there was more. I moved to the door frame where Di had been standing and swept the light across the white paint. a partial print. She had leaned there, and on the floor below it, a luminous trail of footprints led out into the hallway. The powder transfers. It travels. Craig had touched the safe, and then he had touched his trousers, his face, the door handle. I followed the trail, down the hall, all the way to their bedroom door, the handle glowing red. I went back and took photographs, high-resolution close-ups of every handprint, the smashed keypad, the poker lying across the rug, every detail that proved beyond any reasonable doubt that Craig had tried to force his way into my property. I already had the audio confession attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder. I had the video of the violent break-in attempt. Now I had physical evidence tying them to the scene burning like the fires of the hell they were about to walk into. I switched off the UV light. The room swallowed itself in darkness. I went back to the closet and pulled out a small travel bag I had packed days earlier and concealed behind my winter coats. I went through the contents, my passport, the hard drive carrying backups of all my accounts, the original patent documents, and the file on Dr. Finch that Warren had compiled. I wasn't going to sit here until morning. I wasn't going to wait for Dr. Finch and whatever he had loaded in that bag of his. They planned to ambush me at 9:00 a.m. They planned to haul me away. They were going to find an empty bed. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow-blanketed street below. Silent. Still. A world indifferent to the violence that had just taken place in this room. I was leaving this house. Leaving the memories. Leaving the life of Vincent Holt, retired teacher. I slipped the phone into my pocket. The evidence was safe. The trap was set. All I had to do was step out of the blast radius. I opened the window. The cold poured in clean and bracing. I was 69 years old. But as I swung one leg over the sill and reached for the sturdy trellis that ran down to the garden, moving with a strength that only righteous fury can produce, I felt something close to rebirth. The reaction was complete. The catalyst had been introduced. All that remained was to watch it burn. But I stopped. One leg over the sill, the frozen night biting at my skin boot, hovering over the icy wood of the trellis. Leaving was survival. Staying was victory. If I vanished now, I would be nothing but a missing person, a confused old man who wandered off into a Detroit winter. Craig would control the narrative. He would tell the courts I had walked out in a fugue state, that I was too far gone to know which way was home. He would get his conservatorship by default, and I would spend whatever years I had left looking over my shoulder. No. I needed them to commit the crime in full. I needed them to sign their names to a lie large enough to bury them. I needed Dr. Finch to uncap his pen and put it to paper. I pulled my leg back inside. I closed the window and latched it. I tucked the travel bag under the loose floorboard beneath the bed, out of sight, but within reach. Then I settled into the wingback chair, smoothed my hair, and sat waiting for daylight. At exactly 9:10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Not a friendly sound, a summons. I heard Craig's heavy tread rushing to answer it, the low murmur of voices in the foyer, and then the unmistakable wet cough of a heavy smoker. I didn't wait for them to come fetch me. I walked out to the landing and looked down. Craig was shaking hands with a man who looked as though he had been assembled from the leftover parts of better men. Dr. Finch was tall, but wearing a suit that had been expensive a decade ago and was now gone shiny at the elbows. He carried a battered leather medical bag that looked more like a stage prop than an instrument of healing. His face was a road map of poor choices, broken capillaries mapping his nose, a nervous tick pulling at his left eye, a film of sweat that the cold hadn't managed to dry. Craig looked up and spotted me. For just a moment he looked genuinely afraid, as if he half expected me to be clutching the poker, screaming about the safe. Instead, I gripped the banister with trembling hands and blinked down at them. "Good morning, Craig," I said, my voice cracking in exactly the right place. "Who is your friend?" Craig exhaled, his shoulders dropping. The concerned sun mask slid smoothly back into place. "This is Dr. Finch Vincent, a specialist. He's here to help us." "Help you?" I came down the stairs one careful step at a time, the way a toddler does. I stopped in front of the man. He smelled of peppermint, working hard to cover stale bourbon. "A specialist?" I asked. "For the mind, Mr. Holt." "For memory," Dr. Finch said, showing me teeth stained dark from too much coffee. "Your family tells me you've been having some difficulty distinguishing what's real lately." I looked at Craig. He wouldn't hold my gaze. "I'm fine," I murmured. I get confused sometimes. Shall we sit?" Finch suggested, gesturing toward the living room, as though it were his own consulting room. We sat. Di came in from the kitchen with a cup of coffee. She didn't offer me any. She settled beside Craig and took his arm, performing the role of the devoted, worried daughter. Dr. Finch drew a clipboard from his bag. He clicked a silver pen. "Let's begin with the basics, Vincent. Can you tell me what year it is?" I looked at him steadily. It was a trap. Answer wrong, and I was delusional. Answer correctly, and he would call it a lucky guess. "It is 2023, I said, letting it come out as a question. Finch wrote something. He didn't look up. "And who is the President of the United States?" I answered correctly. He wrote again. "Vincent, your family has described aggressive behavior, violent outbursts. Would you say that's accurate?" I let my gaze drift to the fireplace where Craig had hurled my wife's jewelry box, then to the wall behind which the safe sat, hidden behind the painting of the lighthouse in the fog. "I don't like loud noises," I said softly. "They frighten me." Finch nodded, scribbling with energy. "Paranoia, hypersensitivity." He looked up. "And the incident with the soup, Vincent, you poisoned your daughter. Were you aware of what you were doing? Did you hear voices telling you to do it?" A spike of cold rage moved through me. He wasn't conducting a diagnosis. He was writing a script, feeding me the lines he needed me to deliver. "I thought it was parsley," I murmured, studying my hands. Dr. Finch stopped writing. He leaned forward. "Parsley doesn't come in a blue vial, Vincent." I went still. I looked up at him. How did he know about the vial? Craig must have described it. The vial he believed I had used. But I had never mentioned any vial to the police. I had only spoken of jars. "You discussed the vial with Craig?" I asked. And for just a fraction of a second, I let the senile act slip. Finch blinked. He caught it. I'm speaking in general terms. The point is that you introduced a foreign substance into food." He turned the page on his clipboard with a sharp snap. "Let's move on to a cognitive test. I'm going to say 3 words. In 5 minutes, I want you to repeat them back to me. Apple, table, penny." I looked at him. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip. I looked at the tremor in the hand holding the pen. "Apple, table, penny," I said. We sat in silence. Craig tapped his foot. Dee chewed her lip. The clock ticked. 5 minutes passed. "All right," Finch said. "What were the 3 words?" I looked at him with a vacant expression. "What words?" Craig's sigh of relief was so loud, it could have deflated a tire. Finch smiled, a predatory, satisfied smile. He wrote on his clipboard in large block letters. I could read it upside down. "Severe cognitive decline. Immediate danger." He got to his feet. He didn't offer his hand. He turned to Craig instead. It is worse than you described, he said, his voice dropping into something grave and rehearsed. He is completely detached. The memory loss is profound. Coupled with the violent episode, I cannot in good conscience recommend he remain in this environment. Dee began to cry. Dry, mechanical sobs. Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry. What's the diagnosis? Craig asked, working to keep the eagerness out of his voice. Acute dementia with psychotic features, Finch declared. He tore the top sheet from the clipboard and passed it to Craig. This is a medical hold recommendation. He requires a secure facility somewhere equipped to manage his episodes. Craig took the paper. He looked at it the way a man looks at a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, doctor. We only want him to be safe. I pushed myself to my feet. I need to use the bathroom, I said. Sit down, Vincent, Craig snapped. We aren't finished. The doorbell rang again. Craig glanced at his watch. That will be Mr. Duval. Mr. Duval, I asked. The social worker, Di said, dabbing at her dry eyes. We called him to help with the transition. Craig went to the door and returned with a man who resembled a thumb in a cheap suit. Mr. Duval was short, broad, and carried the dead eyes of a bureaucrat who had exchanged his soul for a pension long ago. He didn't take in the room. He looked at the paperwork Craig thrust into his hands. Dr. Finch's report. Duval asked, his voice a flat, colorless drone. Right there, Craig said. Duval scanned it. He nodded. He looked at me for the first time and he didn't see a person. He saw a file number. Mr. Vincent Holt, he said. I am an emergency caseworker with Adult Protective Services. Based on the medical evaluation provided by Dr. Finch and the sworn affidavit from your family regarding the poisoning incident, the state is intervening. Was intervening? I asked, letting my voice tremble. You are being placed under a temporary 5150 hold for emergency psychiatric evaluation, Duval said. You have been deemed an imminent danger to yourself and to others. I stepped back. You are taking me away. You are being transported to the Haverford Behavioral Health Center, Duval said. A bed is waiting. The transport team is 5 minutes out. Haverford. I knew it. A warehouse for the unwanted, a place where they sedated you until your own name became a stranger, or until your family had bled your accounts dry and stopped paying the bill. You can't do this, I whispered. This is my house. It's for your own good, Dad, Dee said, rising from the sofa. She crossed to me and placed her hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, possessive. We can't take care of you anymore. You tried to kill me. You need help. I looked at her. I saw the triumph behind her eyes. She believed she had won. She believed the document in Duval's hand was her checkmate. When are they coming? I asked. Duval checked his phone. The transport van has been delayed by the snow. They will be here in 24 hours. Until then, you are remanded to the custody of your son-in-law. You are not to leave this house. If you attempt to leave, the police will be called, and you will be taken into custody. 24 hours. They had handed me a window, a countdown. Craig looked displeased. Can't you take him now? Oh, we don't feel safe. Protocol, Duval said with a shrug. The beds are full until tomorrow morning. Keep his door locked. Keep him contained. We will be here at 8 a.m. sharp. He handed Craig a carbon copy of the order, pink, the color of a dismissal. Hold on to this. It grants you temporary emergency guardianship pending the court hearing next week. Craig took it. His hands were trembling, but this time with excitement rather than rage. He had the golden ticket. With that paper, he could walk into the bank. He could call S and tell him the money was on its way. Duval left. Finch left shortly after tucking an envelope of cash Craig had pressed into his hands by the door. The three of us were left alone in the living room. The silence was thick and electric. Craig looked down at the paper. He kissed it. He actually kissed it. Then he looked at me and his face twisted into a sneer. "Go to your room, Vincent," he said. I held my ground for a moment. I held his gaze. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to shout that what he was clutching was a warrant for his own arrest, not a guardianship, but I swallowed it back. The trap wasn't sprung yet. "I need my pills," I said, my voice going thin. Craig laughed a short, harsh bark. "You won't need pills where you're going, old man. They have plenty of juice at Haverford. Now move." He grabbed my arm, steered me toward the staircase, and shoved me up the steps. Di stood at the bottom with her arms folded. "Don't forget to lock it this time, Craig. Never mind the safety hazard. Nail it shut if you have to." Craig pushed me into my bedroom. I stumbled and went down onto the rug. "Sleep well, Vincent," he said. "Enjoy the bed. It's the last night you'll ever spend in it." He slammed the door. I heard the lock engage. They had reinstalled it while I was in the hospital. Then came the whir of a power drill. He was driving a bracket into the doorframe, sealing me in. I lay on the floor for a moment, listening to it. He was building a prison. I got up and brushed off my knees. I walked to the window. The snow was falling heavier now, a white curtain drawing itself across the world. 24 hours. I didn't need 24 hours. I needed 20 minutes. I went into the bathroom attached to my suite and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. I moved the toilet paper and the cleaning supplies aside. There at the back was a plastic jug of industrial drain cleaner high-concentration sulfuric acid. I kept it for the stubborn pipes in the old house. I carried the jug to the bedroom door and studied the hinges. They were painted over in layers of white latex, but underneath the paint, they were brass, soft metal. Craig thought he had locked in a frail old man. He thought steel and wood could hold a chemist. He had forgotten that metal dissolves. He had forgotten that I knew the melting point of every material in this house. I poured a small measure of acid into a glass cup. I drew a pipette from my travel bag. I was not going to Haverford. I was going to the bank, then to court. But first I had to melt my way to freedom. I applied the first drop to the top hinge. It hissed. A wisp of acrid smoke curled upward. It smelled like victory. I worked in silence methodically, one drop at a time, weakening the structure, dissolving the integrity of their cage. Downstairs, I heard corks popping. They were celebrating. They were drinking my wine-lifting glasses to a victory they would never collect. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Tomorrow, when the van arrived, all they would find was a door hanging from one hinge and a chemical burn on the floor where I had walked out of their lives for good. The doctor had signed the hold order, yes, but he had signed it with a pen I had supplied during the memory test. A pen loaded with ink that faded to invisible within 12 hours. By the time it reached a courtroom, that medical order would be a blank sheet of paper. I applied another drop. The hinge groaned. Nearly there. The smell of dissolving metal is something you don't forget. It is acrid biting, and it leaves a taste like copper pennies on the back of the throat. In a ventilated laboratory, it is a warning. In a sealed bedroom at 2 in the morning, it is the scent of freedom. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed frame, watching the chemistry do the work that my aging muscles could not. The sulfuric acid from the drain cleaner was viscous and heavy. I had applied it with care using a glass dropper from my travel kit, saturating the wood around the screws of the iron bracket Craig had drilled into the doorframe. I wasn't attempting to dissolve the bracket itself, that would take days. I was attacking the substrate. I was destroying the wood that held the screws in place. Cellulose and lignin break down rapidly when introduced to a high molarity corrosive. The wood hissed softly, bubbling up and turning a charred, oily black. It was a slow violence, a quiet erosion, the same way my family had been hollowing out my life for the better part of 10 years. Downstairs, the house sat in total silence. The celebration had burned itself out hours ago. I pictured Craig unconscious on the sofa, an empty bottle of my expensive scotch dangling loosely from his hand. I pictured Diane dreaming of the shopping sprees she'd go on the moment they had me tucked away in Haverford. They were sleeping the deep, undisturbed sleep of people who believe they've already won. They didn't hear the faint hiss of that victory turning to cinders. I checked my watch. 3:15. The transport van was scheduled for 8. 5 hours. That was my window, provided I could clear the subdivision before the snowplows started their morning routes. I stood and tested the bracket. I put my shoulder into the door. The wood groaned back at me, soft, pulpy, already halfway gone. What I needed was a single, sharp, decisive push. I wrapped a thick towel around my shoulder to absorb the sound. I drew a long breath, pulling the stale prison air of that room into my lungs. I thought about the soup. I thought about the blue vial. I thought about the look on Craig's face when he told me I wouldn't be needing my pills anymore. Then I threw my weight into the door. There was a wet crunch, the sound of a branch giving way in a storm. The screws tore free from the rotted wood, dragging chunks of black sludge with them. The door swung open. I didn't move through it right away. I stood there listening. The house breathed and settled. The refrigerator hummed somewhere below. No footsteps. No shouts. The quiet held. I retrieved my go-bag from beneath the floorboard. Light, efficient. I pulled on my heavy coat, my hat, my gloves. I took one final look around the room. The bed where I had slept for 30 years. The place where I had grieved my wife. The place where I had made the decision to fight for my own life. I would never stand in this room again. Good. It was a crime scene now. I stepped into the hallway. The floorboards were treacherous, quick to creak, but I had lived in this house long enough to know every safe inch of it. I knew exactly where to plant my feet. I pressed close to the wall, moving like a shadow. At the top of the stairs, I paused and looked down into the foyer. The streetlights outside threw long, skeletal shapes through the transom window. I came down slowly, one hand hovering just above the rail without touching it. I had no interest in leaving extra prints, even knowing the house was already dusted with the UV powder I'd scattered earlier. I reached the ground floor. The living room was to my left. I couldn't help myself. I eased into the doorway and looked. Craig was on the sofa exactly as I'd imagined, mouth open, breathing in low, rumbling snores. Diane was curled into the armchair, a blanket pulled around her. The room smelled of alcohol and triumph. There on the coffee table, lit by the pale standby glow of the television, lay the pink slip, the emergency guardianship paper, the lock on my shackles. I crossed to the table without a sound. I moved like something without weight. I picked up the document and held it close. Dr. Finch's signature was looped across the bottom in the blue ink of the pen I had lent him. I studied it carefully. The lines were already beginning to fade, the ink's chemical composition breaking down as it reacted with the open air. By the time they placed this in front of a judge, it would be a blank page, a ghost document for a ghost prisoner. I set it back on the table in exactly the same spot. I wanted them to wake up to it. I wanted them to snatch it up in the morning, rush out to meet the van, and hand over a page full of nothing. I moved to the back door. The front was too loud, too visible. The sliding glass door off the kitchen opened to the garden, to the trellis I had used earlier, to the alleyway beyond. I unlocked it. The mechanism clicked, a sharp, clean sound in the stillness of the kitchen. Craig snorted and shifted on the sofa. I went rigid. He muttered something shapeless and settled back down. I slid the door open. The cold struck me like something solid, a wall built entirely of ice and wind. 20 below with the wind chill factored in. Detroit in February has no mercy for the old or the frail. But I wasn't frail. I stepped out into the snow and pulled the door shut behind me. I was out. The wind clawed at my coat, pushing hard against me, but I dropped my head and kept walking. The snow was deep, piled high against the fence line. I pushed through it, my breath rising in white plumes. I made my way to the alley, the service road running behind the properties, plowed but glazed with ice. I hadn't taken my car. The garage door opener would have woken the house. The engine would have been a signal flare. Walking was the only option. 2 miles to the 24-hour diner on the main road, where I could arrange a car. The walk was a brutal physical trial. My knees ached. Cold worked its way through my boots and turned my toes to wood. My face went numb first, then stopped registering the temperature at all. Every step was a negotiation, with the urge to stop, to sit, to let the freeze take me. But I kept moving. I marched to the beat of my own anger. Left, right, left, right. They wanted me dead. Left, right. They wanted my money. Left, right. I reached the diner 40 minutes later. I was shaking hard enough that my eyebrows had gone white with frost. I stumbled through the door. The warmth hit my frozen skin like a punishment. A waitress behind the counter, tired-looking with kind eyes, glanced up. "Honey, you look like you walked straight out of a freezer," she said. "Car broke down." I told her, my teeth knocking together. "Just need coffee and a phone." I sat in a booth and drank black coffee until my hands remembered how to stay still. I used the diner's landline to call a private car service, the one Warren kept on retainer for high-profile clients. No apps, no digital trail cache, only. The car came 10 minutes later, a black sedan that looked like a hearse, but felt in that moment like a sanctuary. I settled into the back seat. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Loop," I said. "Alcott and Associates." I was asleep before we cleared the block, a deep, dreamless dark. The driver tapped the glass to wake me. We were sitting in front of a steel and glass tower that cut into a gray morning sky. 6 o'clock. The city was stirring to life. I paid the driver and walked into the lobby. The security guard recognized me. Warren had put me on the list. "Mr. Holt," he said with a nod. "Mr. Alcott is expecting you." I rode the elevator to the 45th floor. My ears popped. The doors opened onto a reception area that smelled of good leather and fresh espresso. Warren was already on his feet, waiting. No suit jacket, his tie was loosened, his sleeves pushed up to the elbows. He looked like a general running operations from a bunker. He crossed the room and took my hand in both of his. The grip was firm, anchoring. "You made it," he said. I pulled the go bag from my shoulder and let it drop to the floor. "I made it," I said. The house didn't. I believe I dissolved a doorframe. Warren's mouth pulled into a tight, grim smile. "Small price to pay. Come in. The war room is ready." We walked into his corner office. The view of Lake St. Clair was vast, a frozen gray expanse that stretched to the horizon. But the real view was on the conference table. Files, hard drives, monitors. 2 junior associates hammered away at laptops. Warren pulled out a chair. "Sit. Eat. We have work to do." He slid a plate of pastries and a fresh coffee in front of me. I ate like a man who'd forgotten what food was. While I worked through the plate, Warren briefed me. "The assets are frozen," he said. "We got the notification at 3:00 a.m. Craig tried to access the Cayman account online. It triggered the trap. We have his IP address. We have the login attempt on record." "Good," I said, brushing crumbs from my mouth. "What about the doctor?" Warren lifted a file. "Dr. Finch disgraced desperate. We ran a full background check. 3 malpractice suits pending, and a gambling debt that rivals your son-in-law's. He didn't sign that paper purely for cash. Craig promised him a cut of the estate. We have the trail." "And the hearing?" I asked. "Emergency session," Warren said. 10 o'clock. Your daughter filed electronically an hour ago. She's claiming you are violent, delusional, and missing. She wants immediate temporary custody of the estate to fund your search and rescue." I laughed. It came out dry and scraping. "Search and rescue. She wants to pay off the loan shark." "Exactly," Warren said. He leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. "Here is the play, Vincent. We don't just defend, we attack. We don't walk in there simply to prove you're sane. We walk in and we drop the guillotine." I reached into my coat pocket. I drew out the tissue holding the blue vial and set it on the walnut dining table. "Analyze this," I said. "There's still a drop left." Warren studied the vial without touching it. "Digitalis?" he asked. "Concentrated," I said. "Homemade, crude but enough to kill." Warren nodded toward one of the associates. "Bag it. Get it to the private lab rush courier. I want results by 9:30. He turned back to me. "We have the financial motive. We have the forensic evidence of the poisoning. We have the UV photographs of the attempted robbery you sent over. We have the recorded conspiracy to commit murder. Is it enough?" I asked. "Enough to put them away for good." Warren turned toward the window and the rising sun. "Vincent, by noon today they won't just be broke. They'll be staring down federal charges. Attempted murder is a state crime, but wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy that pulls the feds into the picture. And once we demonstrate to the judge that they weaponized the court system to facilitate a homicide," he turned back his eyes flat and hard, "the judge is going to seal the room and call the marshals himself." I settled back into the leather chair and felt the coffee's warmth spread through my chest. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the target. I was the one who had drawn the blueprint for their ruin. "Let them go to court," I said quietly. "Let them stand up there and lie. I want to watch their faces when I walk through that door." "You will," Warren said. "You'll see every bit of it." I shut my eyes for a moment and drew on what reserves I had left. The night was finished. The long, frozen march was behind me. Now came the fire. The heavy oak doors of the Wayne County Circuit Court were built to enforce a sense of solemnity and order. But standing on the other side of that threshold, straightening the cuffs of my suit, I saw them for what they were. Just wood. Wood that could be splintered, consumed, or in my case, simply pushed open. I stood beside Warren Alcott, who checked his watch with the precision of a sniper waiting for a target to drift into the crosshairs. It was 9:58. The emergency hearing had been running for 18 minutes. We weren't late. We were calibrating. Warren wanted them to commit themselves. He wanted every word entered into the record. He wanted the court stenographer's fingers moving across those keys, capturing each lie in full so that when the blow came, it would land with total crushing finality. Through the gap in the doors, I could make out muffled voices. My daughter was speaking, her voice thin and unsteady, a finely tuned performance of a woman on the edge of collapse. "He isn't the father I knew, Your Honor," Diane sobbed. The sound of her crying once had the power to undo me. Now it only steadied my pulse. It was like monitoring a chemical reaction in a beaker, predictable, volatile, and entirely within my control. He looked at me with such hatred. He poured the liquid into my soup and he smiled. He stood there and watched me eat it. If my husband hadn't rushed me to the hospital, she let the sentence trail away, leaving the silence to carry the weight. I could picture her in there. No makeup, something modest and slightly rumpled to suggest genuine distress. She was playing for sympathy, even in a room that held almost no one, just the judge, the bailiff, and the court clerk. "And where is Mr. King now?" the judge asked. His voice carried the weariness of a man who has absorbed too many family catastrophes and simply wants to clear his docket before lunch. "We don't know," Craig answered, his voice pitched low and grave with a show of manly concern that barely concealed the terror of his debts. "We locked his bedroom door last night for his own protection, on Dr. Finch's recommendation. When we went to check on him this morning, the door had been forced. He used some kind of tool. He fled into the storm. He is out there right now, Your Honor." Diane's voice climbed in pitch. "He is confused. He is violent. He is 70 years old, wandering through Detroit in a blizzard. We are terrified he is going to harm himself or someone else. We just need the authority to find him access to his accounts, to bring in private security and arrange medical transport. We cannot help him with our hands tied." It was a compelling story. It had everything: the dangerous, unraveling patriarch, the devoted and desperate children, the weather ticking down like a clock. I glanced at Warren. He gave a single nod. It was time. The judge exhaled. "Based on the medical affidavit from Dr. Finch and the testimony presented regarding the poisoning incident, I am inclined to find that Mr. King poses an immediate danger to himself and to the public. The court is prepared to grant emergency temporary guardianship to the petitioners, Diane and Craig." He reached for his pen. I could picture the ink moving the signature that would deed away my life, my liberty, and everything I had built. Warren pushed the doors open. The sound rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. The heavy wood struck the stops hard. We walked in. I didn't shuffle. I didn't waver. I moved with the long, unhurried strides of a man who is certain of the ground beneath him. Warren kept pace at my side, his briefcase swinging like a weapon at his hip. Craig and Diane turned in their seats simultaneously, two puppets jerked by the same string. Their faces were a portrait of absolute paralyzed shock. Diane's mouth fell open, her manufactured tears evaporating in an instant beneath the heat of her panic. Craig seized the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles draining white. They were looking at a ghost. They were looking at the man they believed was dying in a snowbank somewhere, the man whose mind was supposed to be porridge by now. What they saw instead was Vincent Holt, freshly shaved, wearing a charcoal double-breasted suit that cost more than their car, his eyes clear and cold as the winter sky outside. "Wait, Your Honor." Warren's voice filled the room, rolling into every corner. The judge looked up, startled, his pen suspended just above the order. "Who is this?" "This is a closed hearing. I am Warren Alcott, appearing on behalf of Mr. Vincent Holt," Warren said, gesturing toward me. "We have a counter-motion to present, specifically a motion to dismiss with prejudice and a request for the immediate arrest of the petitioners." "Arrest?" Craig shoved back from the table, his chair clattering to the floor. "What is this? How did you—" "Sir, sit down." The bailiff stepped forward, voice sharp. "Your Honor, this man is dangerous." Diane's finger shot toward me, trembling visibly. "He is having a psychotic break. He shouldn't be here, he should be in a hospital." I stopped in the middle of the aisle. I looked at the judge. I did not look at my daughter. She had ceased to merit my attention. "I am not psychotic, Your Honor," I said. My voice was even measured the voice of a man who has explained a theorem to a room full of students who should have paid closer attention. I am also not missing. I am standing right here. And I would like to address this court regarding the attempted murder that took place in my home last night. Attempted murder. The judge's eyes narrowed. He looked from me to the shaking couple at the plaintiff's table. Mr. King, your daughter claims it was you who did the poisoning. I walked forward until I stood at the defense table. I set both hands flat on the wood. She claims a great many things, Your Honor, I said. She claims I am senile. She claims I am destitute. She claims she loves me. Every last one of those claims is a lie. Craig was sweating through his shirt now. I could smell it from 5 feet away. He turned to the judge, eyes stretched wide. He's lying. He's fabricating all of this. Look at the doctor's report, Dr. Finch said. Warren stepped forward and dropped a thick file squarely on the judge's bench. Dr. Finch has had his medical license revoked in 3 states, Your Honor. Warren said, his tone smooth and unhurried. As of 1 hour ago, he is in police custody on charges of writing fraudulent prescriptions. We also have the bank records documenting a $5,000 cash withdrawal from Craig Grady's account. Made yesterday, funds delivered to Dr. Finch immediately before he signed that affidavit. Craig made a strangled sound. Diane stared at him, something like horror breaking open across her face. That is circumstantial, Craig shouted. You cannot prove that. We can prove considerably more than that, I said quietly. I reached into my coat pocket and produced a flash drive. I held it up and let the light from the courtroom chandeliers catch it. Your Honor, I said, this drive contains audio recordings made inside my home over the last 48 hours. It contains my son-in-law confessing to debts owed to illegal lenders. It contains my daughter expressing frustration that the poison she put in my soup did not work quickly enough. And it contains video footage from last night of these two attempting to break into my safe with a tire iron while they believed I was sleeping. Diane let out a wail, a sound of raw animal terror. No, that's illegal. You cannot record us in our own house. It is my house, Diane, I said, finally turning to face her. My deed, my title, my rules. And in Michigan, recording a crime in progress to protect one's own life falls under a very specific set of legal exceptions. The judge lifted the file Warren had placed on the bench. He opened it. He studied the photograph, the glowing handprints on the safe illuminated by UV light. He read through the transcript. His expression hardened into something cold and deliberate. He looked at Craig and Diane the way a judge looks at people who have already been convicted in his mind. Bailiff, he said, his voice quiet and dangerous. Lock the doors. Craig scrambled. He actually tried to run, lunging for the side exit, shoving past his overturned chair, his eyes fixed on the door. Sit down, the bailiff barked, hand dropping to his taser. Craig stopped cold. He turned and looked back at me. He looked at the man he had tried to gaslight, tried to bury. He found no mercy there. He found only the chemist watching the final reaction run its course. Your Honor, Warren said, drawing another document from his briefcase. We also have the toxicology report from a private lab time-stamped this morning. It analyzes the residue from the blue vial that Mr. Holt recovered from the trash after his daughter poisoned his soup. The compound matches the digitalis found in Diane Grady's system. She wasn't poisoned by accident. She was poisoned because I switched the plates. The judge set down his pen. He looked at Diane. You tried to poison your own father. His voice carried undisguised revulsion. Diane was sobbing now. Real tears this time. The tears of someone who finally understands the game is finished. He has so much money, she cried, her finger leveled at me. He has millions and he let us live like we were nothing. He watched us struggle. He owes us. There it was. The truth finally shed of every layer of pretended love and concern. I looked at her. A ghost of the feeling I once had for her moved through me, and I crushed it without ceremony. I don't owe you anything, Diane, I said. I gave you life. You tried to take mine. The ledger is even. The judge's gavel came down like a thunderclap. Motion for guardianship denied with prejudice. His voice filled every corner of the room. Bailiff, take Mr. and Mrs. Grady into custody. I am holding them in contempt pending the arrival of the district attorney to file formal charges for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The bailiff moved. He wrenched Craig's hands behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. Diane was next. She screamed as the metal bit into her wrists. Dad, please don't let them do this. I'm pregnant. I'm sick. I watched them be taken away, hauled through the side door, kicking and screaming, every shred of dignity stripped from them, their futures reduced to nothing. When the door swung shut, the silence that returned to the courtroom felt earned. The judge looked at me. He looked at the file. He looked at the man standing straight in the center of that room. Mr. King, he said quietly, I am very sorry. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I turned to Warren. He was closing his briefcase with practiced efficiency. He didn't smile. He simply nodded. It is done, he said. Not yet, I said. I moved to the window and looked out over the snow-blanketed city. Somewhere out there, a loan shark was checking his watch. Somewhere, a real estate agent was puzzling over why the listing on my house had been pulled. Somewhere, a life was waiting to be reclaimed. I have one more stop, I said. Where? Warren asked. The jail, I said. I need to say goodbye, and I need to tell them exactly what I did with the money they were willing to kill for. Warren paused. You don't have to do that, Vincent. You've won. I know, I said, turning back to him. But the reaction isn't finished until the residue is cleared. I want them to know. I want them to sit in those cells for the rest of their lives, understanding that the fortune they destroyed themselves chasing simply doesn't exist anymore. I straightened my tie. I checked my reflection in the glass panel of the courtroom door. The old man was gone. The victim was gone. Now let's go, Warren, I said. I have a donation to make. The courtroom doors swung open again, but this time it wasn't a lawyer making an entrance. It was the district attorney flanked by 2 federal agents in windbreakers stenciled with FBI. They moved with the slow, crushing momentum of a mudslide. Craig, still being wrestled into a chair by the bailiff, went utterly still. Whatever color had flooded back into his face during his screaming dissolved instantly, leaving him looking like wet dough. The district attorney didn't glance at Craig. He walked straight to the bench and set a heavy banker's box on the judge's desk. Your Honor, he said, his voice gravelly and flat, like a man who does this every Tuesday. The state is upgrading the charges. We are adding conspiracy to commit capital murder, wire fraud, and racketeering. The federal agents present would also like a word regarding the interstate transmission of threats connected to the loan sharks Mr. Grady has been conducting business with. Craig sputtered. Racketeering? That is insane. I am a businessman. Warren stepped forward without a word. He connected his laptop to the courtroom's AV system. The large wall-mounted monitors flickered on. The footage was grainy but high definition. My kitchen. The timestamp read 48 hours prior, and there was Diane. She was standing at the kitchen island. The camera concealed in the button of my cardigan, which I had draped over the chair earlier that day, to confirm the angle had captured her profile perfectly. We watched in silence as she drew the blue vial from her pocket. We watched her uncork it. We watched the clear liquid fall into the soup. 1 drop, 2, 3. Diane, handcuffed and slumped in the jury box where they had seated her, lifted her eyes to the screen. She made a low, keening sound, like something wounded. There was nowhere to go with it. No parsley confusion, no misunderstanding. It was a calculated, cold-blooded dosing. The video cut. The screen went dark, and the audio took over. Craig's voice crystal clear. 7 days, I know. 500,000. Craig squeezed his eyes shut. He knew that voice. He knew that particular fear intimately. We force the issue. We get him committed. Once he's in, we liquidate him. The audio shifted, the clanging scrape of metal on metal, the tire iron against my safe. Then, if Finch doesn't sign, we suffocate him with a pillow. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. The court reporter had stopped typing, her mouth slightly ajar. The judge looked from the monitors to the 2 defendants. His expression had moved past anger. It had arrived somewhere worse, indifference. He regarded them the way you regard waste that needs disposing of. "Mr. Alcott," the judge said, turning to Warren, "I assume you can authenticate these recordings." "Hot chain of custody is fully established, Your Honor," Warren replied, passing over another thick file. "We also have Mr. Holt's actual medical records from 3 days ago, a full neurological workup conducted at the Cleveland Clinic." He handed the file up. "MRI cognitive testing blood work. His brain function registers in the 99th percentile for his age. He is not senile, Your Honor. He is in all likelihood the sharpest person in this room." The judge paged through the records. He looked at the fraudulent report Dr. Finch had signed. He looked at the real one. He closed the folder with a clean, decisive snap. "This is a circus," he muttered. He looked up at the federal agents. "They're all yours." The agents moved in. Not with standard handcuffs, with heavy transport chains, the kind that run from wrists to waist to ankles. The sound of the steel ratcheting closed was final in a way that nothing else that morning had been. Clack, clack, clack. Craig tried to get to his feet, one last attempt at a speech, one final bid to reshape the story. "He set us up," he shouted, spittle flying. It was entrapment. He wanted us to do it. He left the door open. "He is the criminal." One of the agents pushed him back into the chair. Not gently. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent said, his voice stripped of all feeling. "I strongly suggest you begin exercising it right now, Mr. Grady, before you talk yourself into the electric chair." Diane wasn't screaming anymore. She had gone somewhere else, entirely catatonic, staring across the room at me as they pulled her to her feet. Her eyes were hollow and dark in a bloodless face. She looked at my suit. She looked at Warren. She looked at the freedom I still had. "Why?" she whispered, a single word, carrying the full weight of a lifetime of entitlement. "Because you broke the contract, Diane," I said quietly, my voice traveling the length of that room without effort. "Parents care for children. Children cherish parents. You mistook my care for weakness, and you mistook my silence for a man who wasn't paying attention." The agents moved them toward the rear exit. The heavy doors swung open onto a hallway packed with press. Flashbulbs burst like lightning strikes, throwing their shame into sharp, strobing relief. I watched them go. I watched the backs of their heads, the defeated curve of their shoulders. I felt no joy, no triumph. What I felt was a heavy, clean sense of completion, the feeling of rinsing out a beaker after a long and dangerous experiment. The toxic elements had been removed. The lab was safe again. The judge banged his gavel and dismissed the session. Warren began unplugging his laptop. "That went well," he said, folding the lid down. "It went exactly as calculated," I said. I buttoned my jacket and checked my reflection in the darkened monitor. The man looking back was tired, yes, but free, and with a promise still to keep. "Come on, Warren," I said, turning away from the empty defendant's table. "We're going to the jail. I want them to hear how the story ends. I want them to know where the money went. And then I want to buy a map. I hear New Mexico is beautiful this time of year." The visiting room carried the smell of bleach and stale desperation, a scent ground into the cinderblock walls and the scratched plexiglass barrier. I settled onto the metal stool, back straight, hands folded quietly on the ledge. On the other side of the glass, Diane was escorted in by a guard. She looked like a different person. The imperious woman who had sneered at me across my own kitchen was nowhere to be seen. In her place was a hollow figure in a bright orange jumpsuit. Hair-matted eyes swollen nearly shut. She grabbed the phone receiver from its cradle with jerky, frantic movements. "Dad!" She cried into it. Her voice thin and distorted through the line. "You have to get me out of here. You have to pay for a lawyer. The public defender is useless. They're talking about 20 years, Dad. 20 years. I lifted my receiver slowly and said nothing. I just watched her. I studied her face, searching for some trace of the little girl I used to read to sleep, and found only the woman who had wanted me dead because I was inconveniently still alive. "Ma, don't just sit there," she shrieked, striking the glass with her palm. "Craig told me about the patent. He told me about the money. You have $15 million hidden away. You've been sitting on it while we struggled. Use it. Hire me a real attorney, and I'll sign whatever you want. I'll disappear. Just get me out." I leaned forward. My voice came out soft, steady, and cold as liquid nitrogen. "I don't have $15 million, Diane." She went still. Her eyes moved rapidly across my face, hunting for the lie. "What?" she whispered. "You're lying. Craig saw the files. The lawyer said I had $15 million, I said, correcting her. Past tense. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the Vincent Holt estate has been fully liquidated. I reached into my breast pocket and withdrew a folded document. I pressed it flat against the glass so she could read the bold print clearly. It was a receipt, a transfer confirmation. $15 million. I read aloud, tasting each syllable. Donated in full. Half to the National Center for Responsible Gaming to help people like your husband. Half to the Elder Justice Coalition to protect people like me from people like you. Diane stared at the paper. Her mouth fell open. No sound came out. She read the numbers. She saw the zeros. She saw the date. "Dalcon," she choked. "You gave it away today. You gave it all away." "Every penny," I said. "I sold the house to a developer an hour ago. The keys are surrendered. The accounts are closed. There is no inheritance, Diane. There is no bail money. There is no golden parachute. You wanted that money so badly, you were prepared to kill for it. The money is gone now, and you are still here." The understanding hit her like something physical. She slid down against the ledge until her face was nearly level with the counter. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why would you do this?" "Because you broke the heart of the only person who would have saved you," I said. "You chose the money over your father. Now you have neither." She began to scream, a raw, primal sound, dredged up from somewhere beneath grief and rage. "I hate you. I hope you die alone. I hope you rot in hell." I stood up. I set the receiver back in its cradle and cut off her voice. I looked at her one final time through the glass. She was mouthing curses, both palms hammering against the barrier. But she was silent to me now, a silent film, a tragedy I had already watched to its conclusion. I turned and walked out. The heavy steel door clanged shut at my back, sealing the tomb I had constructed for them. Outside, the air was sharp and cold sunlight glancing off the snowdrifts in clean, bright angles. Warren was waiting at the curb. He wasn't standing beside a sedan. He was leaning against a 40FD luxury RV, a pearl-white Pathfinder that gleamed against the winter light, brand new, fully loaded and paid for, with the only money I had kept the proceeds from the sale of my old car, and whatever remained in my personal checking account. Warren pressed a set of keys and a thick envelope into my hand. "The transfer is complete," he said. "You are officially a man of modest means, Vincent. The charities are ecstatic. Let them be," I said, taking the keys. "It'll do more good out there than it ever would have inside this family." I shook Warren's hand. "Thank you, my friend, for believing me." I climbed up into the driver's seat. It sat high over the road, the windshield a wide panoramic frame around a world I had neglected for far too long. I breathed in the smell of new leather. I felt the engine catch and settle into a deep, powerful rumble as I turned the key. I looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. No one to navigate. No one to complain about the temperature. Just a map of the American Southwest and a travel mug of black coffee. I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. It was vibrating, a call coming in from the county jail. Diane trying to claw her way back to me. Or perhaps Craig finally reckoning with the fact that his 7 days were gone and he was caged with no means to settle his debt. I rolled down the window. I popped the back off the phone and worked the SIM card free. A thin sliver of plastic that had tethered me to a life built on lies and betrayal. I snapped it cleanly between my thumb and forefinger and dropped both pieces out into the gray slush of the gutter below. I put the RV in gear. I didn't check the mirror. I didn't spare a glance back at the skyline of Detroit, the city where I had raised a daughter, buried a wife, and survived a murder. I looked at the road ahead, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling toward the horizon. I reached over and turned on the radio. Classic rock filled the cabin. I pressed the accelerator down. The RV surged out and away, leaving the jail, the court, and the wreckage of my family receding behind me. I was 69 years old. I had no home. I drove away from that city with nothing in the rearview mirror that I needed anymore. No house, no fortune. No family pretending to love me. And for the first time in longer than I can say I could breathe, what this cost me was not the money. The money was easy to let go. What it cost me was the version of myself that kept believing, kept waiting, kept making excuses for people who had long since decided I was only worth what they could take from me. I believe God allowed me to see the truth before it was too late, not to punish them, but to free me. That freedom did not come from the courtroom. It came from the moment I stopped protecting the people who were trying to bury me. Here is what I learned, and what I hope you take with you. If someone only shows up when there is something to gain, that is not love, that is a transaction. Name it correctly. Document everything, quietly, before you need it. The person who stays calm and keeps records will almost always outlast the person who only has rage. When you give and receive only contempt in return, walking away is not abandonment. It is the most honest thing you can do for yourself and for them. If you have ever watched a family member reveal who they truly are when they thought you had nothing left, you know exactly what this story is about. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. This kind of story deserves a real conversation. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that it is never too late to protect yourself. And if you have not yet subscribed to Family Revenge Stories, now is a good time. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, I mean that. Until next time.